As the remnants of 19th century Victorian ideals died out, the horrors of World War I and the rise of Hollywood played a major part in establishing what made men attractive 100 years ago, and some of it will surprise you. If you think back to all those stoic portraits of men from the mid-19th century, you might find that a lot of them sported some pretty impressive facial hair, bushy beards, huge sideburns, the famous, or perhaps infamous, mutton chops. These were common and, for the time, practical. But by the end of the century, an abundance of facial hair was seen as unhygienic, and the 20th century brought two very specific problems for beard wearers. Gone were the dangerous straight razors of the past, which could leave nasty cuts if used improperly. It was the era of the safety razor, just in time for World War I. The introduction of chemical warfare during that terrible conflict made gas masks a necessity, and they didn't work well with a beard underneath. The US military required that men be clean-shaven, even providing them with the new safety razors, which caught on and made their way back to the States after the war.
Reveal yourself.
There's nothing to reveal, it's just a beard.
The results are evident when you take a look at young men photographed in the 1920s. Many of them, Hollywood stars included, have no facial hair at all, although it wasn't uncommon to find those who opted for thin, well-kept mustaches. Hairstyles are one of those things that can define the look of a decade. After all, what would the 1980s be without the mullet? Then there's the 1950s pompadour, or the 1990s with its abundance of frosted tips and shaggy middle parts. In much the same way, the 1920s gave birth to its own iconic hairstyles. At the time, most men preferred their hair neatly slicked back, away from their face, oiled and parted down the middle or slightly off to one side. It was kept just long enough to look neat and no longer. Otherwise, it would start falling down onto the neck, a fashion faux pas for the period. What's more, this particular trend made it easy for men to try on fashionable hats without making a mess of their hair. Still, it's worth mentioning that not all hair could easily achieve this look. Straight hair could, but curls made it a bit more difficult to pull off. But men with curly locks could still achieve peak fashion.
Before wax pomades were invented, there was Brilliantine, an oil-based product that left a messy residue on anything it touched.
A little bit of well-managed wave was perfectly acceptable, so long as miracle products like Brilliantine were in the mix, keeping the curls in check while also adding a bit of shine. The height of male fashion during the 1920s may have been a little formal, but it was a pretty notable departure from the trends that had come before. If you looked at clothing ads up through the 1910s, you'd find some very serious, relatively dour scenes. Men in formal wear at their places of work.
Winifred, will you be good enough to explain this unseemly hullabaloo?
You'd be likely to find long, heavy coats or other designs borrowed from European style, things like tight vests and starched collars, for example. But once the 1920s rolled around, the overall view of fashion began to change. According to Daniel Dellis Hill in American Menswear, the power look of the bulky, over-padded clothing of the Edwardian era was abandoned in favor of the slim silhouette of the lithe young man. Natural shoulder lines emphasized a feline agility rather than brawn. Shorter, lighter coats evoked a feeling of youth and vigor, as did ditching formal vests and wearing shirts made of more comfortable materials, which all happened to go along with advertising trends and social norms at the time, enjoying life, leisure, and recreation, rather than holding to the more stifling conventions of the past. While Hollywood was a major factor in determining standards of beauty in the 1920s, there was also radio, which made its way into popular usage during World War I. Music was no longer an elitist form of entertainment. It could be enjoyed by everyone, which in turn created more of a focus on people's voices rather than just their looks. One particular type of singer that really came into their own in the 1920s was the crooner, typically a male vocalist known for their soft, subtle tones.
Moses supposes his toes are roses, but Moses supposes erroneously.
The style hadn't been possible until that point. Microphones had only just become sensitive enough to pick up and amplify such quiet sounds, and technological improvements allowed the performer to be physically closer to the mic while singing, essentially whispering their words. The soft tone made the performance feel more intimate, both personal and romantic, something shared between the singer and their audience, almost like two lovers holding each other close and whispering into each other's ears. Add to that fact that many of the crooner songs had, at the very least, romantic undertones, or were explicitly about romance, and it's no surprise that listeners were mesmerized. In the 21st century, couples rarely get married immediately.
Any ideas when this wedding might happen? Grandparents do have a tendency to die.
First comes the whole ritual of dating and figuring out if two people are really a match. But if you know a bit about history, then you know that arranged marriages were once a common occurrence. When society at large made the switch to dating from old-school courtship, men didn't really know what to do with themselves. In the past, they could pretty much just let their family's reputation speak for them for the most part, and that alone would secure them a partner.
No one makes their own way. Not really. Least of all a woman. You'll need to marry well.
But as the old ways faded, status began to mean relatively little, and potential partners cared more about personality and the things that they could do as a couple. It was a new concept for the time, even if it's commonplace today. The Victorian era is hardly one that most people associate with sexual freedom. It's no real stretch to say that stoicism and etiquette were the norm as the 19th century came to a close and the 20th century began. But the 1920s were where the change really set in. Though it's a familiar concept today, at the time, the idea that love was about passion rather than formal affairs was a rather new line of thinking. In the 1920s, youth culture embraced rebellion. And when it came to romance, that also often meant embracing casual shows of affection and a much looser relationship with things like premarital sex. Petting parties became something of a symbol of high school and college life for many students, chances for young people to make out without judgment from their peers, with their activities sometimes even spilling into public places. Of course, older folks were scandalized, but that may have been part of the point, at least for some. It was a statement, a way to clearly reject outdated social norms. Sure, in the present day, it'd be no surprise to see a couple getting close in public, but back in the 1920s, PDA was a whole new world. Media has come a pretty long way in the last century, especially when it comes to using sensitivity while writing fictional characters from minority backgrounds.
Yes, I know. You never expected to see me.
Granted, this is a discussion that's constantly evolving. The 1920s were far different though, given that the era birthed the trope of the Latin lover. The most well-known actor to be dubbed this way was Rudolph Valentino, a handsome Italian man who found work in Hollywood due to his so-called exotic looks. His star really rose with his leading role in the 1921 film The Sheik, in which he portrayed an Arab, something that definitely wouldn't fly today. But given this was the 1920s, people went nuts, not only for Valentino's on-screen work, but they also ate up his so-called scandalous behavior. Taken together, the actor became something of a troubled romantic in the eyes of fans. Valentino wasn't Hollywood's only, quote, Latin lover in the 1920s, however. There were a number of other white actors also cast as characters of color, and with great effect, since as the trope became more widespread, so too did the desire to romanticize people for their ethnic backgrounds, a fascination with exoticism that was superficial at best.
I'm sure you're very respectable, madam.
I must confess I don't quite know the standard of respectability that you demand in your boarding house.
The Latin lover as a trope continued to lean into that romanticism, and Hollywood made hay with the idea, seducing audiences with leading men who were dangerous and controlling, but still passionate, different enough to be interesting, but not so different as to be uncomfortable. Deeply problematic as all of that is now, it certainly made for a few heartthrobs a century ago. The 1920s are remembered for many different things. Perhaps it's the secretive world of prohibition, with speakeasies, bootleggers, and illegal smuggling operations playing cat and mouse with the authorities. Or maybe it's the gilded extravagance you'd expect of the Roaring '20s, all illegal booze, parties, and dancing, like a scene straight out of The Great Gatsby. But the 20s were also a golden era for American sports. As it turns out, this particular trend was likely related to the obsession with the idea of youth that was prevalent at the time. After all, sports have been around forever, but they will always celebrate youth, tying it to accomplishment and ability, which makes athletes an obvious role model for many. Sports figures could be seen as symbols of health, vigor, and beauty, as well as paragons of virtue, purity, and hard work. Pretty much any positive trait could be mapped onto those with athletic prowess. Weirdly enough, the interest in athleticism also brought about a different craze that's carried through to today, even if most of us may not know that it originated in the 1920s. Sun-tanned skin. As normal people took to sports, by the late 1920s, they found themselves tanning from spending time outside. That darker skin tone became associated with health and youth, which drew more people towards swimming because that was a great opportunity to get a natural tan. By the 1930s, the desire for tanned skin had developed into the fad that's still around today.